Hello, and yes, you did read that right. This is the iPhone 13 Pro Max, and this phone is literally insane. But before we jump into that, just let me know in the comments, like always, if there's any suggestions on how I can make my videos better, anything I need to improve on. It'll be greatly appreciated. I read all the comments. But yeah, let's jump in to the iPhone 13 Pro Max. So yeah, this is the iPhone 13 Pro Max. Obviously, this phone came out in 2021. The model I have currently is, I don't even know, the black model, and I have the 1 TB version. This is not my phone. This is my stepfather's phone. He is selling it for $600. So that is actually a pretty good deal. You can go on eBay and find them for 1 TB for around $600, maybe even $700. But if you want to get like 256 gigabytes or 128, you can get them as low as possibly $450 if you look long enough. And for $400 to $500 to $600, this phone is honestly a really good deal. I mean, low key, I wouldn't spend $600 on a 1 TB iPhone 13 Pro Max. I'd rather spend that money on like getting a 15 or something because of the newer processor. But the 13 Pro Max is still absolutely amazing. There are some things that aren't the best about it, but before we get into that, let's jump into the things that are absolutely amazing about this phone. First off, the size. This phone is a 6.7-inch screen. Here it is compared to my personal main phone, which is the iPhone 13, about the same size as an iPhone 16. The 13 Pro Max is a little bit thicker though, or is that the 13 that's thicker? I'm trying to like feel them. I'm pretty sure the 13 is actually thicker. That's weird. But let's compare sizes. So, as you can see, 13 Pro Max on the left, obviously, then 13 Pro Max is just significantly bigger because it has that 6.7-inch screen compared to a 6.1-inch screen on the iPhone 13. Now, my iPhone 13 feels perfectly fine for the size, but the 13 Pro Max is just ginormous. I know the 16 Pro Max is I know the 16 Pro Max is 6.9 inches, but the 16 Plus is around 6.7 inches, so 6.7 inches, once again, still really big. And the screen on this phone is amazing on the iPhone 13 Pro Max. Here, let's push this iPhone 13 out the way. The iPhone 13 Pro Max literally is the first iPhone with 120 hertz. Now, people were begging for 120 hertz on iPhones for the longest time. And this phone is absolutely beautiful. It is super smooth. The bezels aren't even big. I know people are talking about how much smaller the bezels got on the iPhone 16 Pros, but the iPhone 15s, 14s, and all the way back to 13s or even 12s, they don't have big bezels. These are not, if you don't know what a bezel is, the black bar around the phone. The bezel on iPhones, at least from 12 and up, aren't big at all. That is not big, and they're even. iPhones always had even bezels, which is good to see. So the screen on this phone absolutely does not disappoint. I mean, it obviously doesn't have that dynamic island, but that is just a gimmick, low key. You know what, I was thinking about the dynamic island the other day, and I was thinking, why didn't Apple just keep the notch design but make it touchscreen like the dynamic island? Because the dynamic island, it cuts more into content because it cuts down deeper into the screen than the actual notch. So what if they just kept the notch design but was able to like make it touchscreen, if like how the dynamic island is, if that makes sense? Wouldn't that have been low-key better? Because it doesn't, the notch, once again, doesn't cut into videos as much as the pill or the dynamic island. So that was just a little thought I thought about. But the screen on this phone, once again, absolutely beautiful. 120 hertz. Let me pull up the specs on my iPhone 13 for the screen and like the resolution and the peak brightness and all that stuff. Now, while I'm pulling up the specs here for the iPhone 13 Pro Max, if you're thinking about what iPhone to get, like should you get the 13 Pro Max or 14 Pro, low-key 13 Pro Max, because the battery life is just way better, and the only difference is that dynamic island. But let me pull up the specs here. So the display on the phone, I have it now pulled up. It is a Super Retina XDR OLED 120 Hz HDR10 Dolby Vision, whatever that means. 1200 peak nit brightness. Newer iPhones now get around 2500 peak nit brightness, but 1200 peak nit brightness is still very good compared to my iPhone 13 at least, which is around 800 peak nit brightness. I will say we can compare this iPhone to my other iPhones I have, not my other iPhone, sorry, my other phones I have, and my Samsung Note 20 Ultra is 6.9 inches, so it is a little bit bigger, but my Note 20 Ultra gets around 1500 peak nit brightness compared to 1200 once again on the iPhone 13 Pro Max, but that is perfectly fine. 1200. You won't have any issues with the screen. I'm telling you, like, it's big enough. The bezels are small enough. The notch, you don't have to mess with it. You don't have to touch it. You don't have to touch it like you do with the dynamic island, which can cause the front-facing camera to get all greasy and stuff. So the screen on this phone obviously has that 120 hertz. There's literally like nothing wrong with the screen. 458 ppi, whatever. Now that we're done with the screen, let's just jump into the battery life on this phone. Amazing. Amazing. Like, literally amazing. The 16 Pro Max, 15 Pro Max, 14 Pro Max, their battery life, if it's better, it's barely better. It's not worth the upgrade for the battery life alone. Sorry, my camera's over here shaking. For the battery life alone, it's not worth it. If your iPhone 13 Pro Max is having battery issues and you're thinking it's dying fast or something, then just replace the battery. You don't have to get a whole new iPhone thinking the battery life is going to be way better than what your iPhone 13 Pro Max was when you got it, when the battery health was at 100%, if that makes sense. So, screen on time for the iPhone 13 Pro Max, it's around literally 8 to 10 hours depending on your usage. Some people, oh, mine lasts a few days. Well, you're not on it for a few days straight. You're only on it for like 8 hours over the course of like 2 days or something. I hate when people say that. It's so annoying. They're like, no, my phone lasts me 5 days. No, it does not, bro. You're not on it for 5 days straight. So the iPhone 13 Pro Max lasts you 8 to 10 hours of screen on time, possibly even more depending on your usage and just that stuff, really. So battery life, no issues on this phone. You will not have any complaints. It is significantly better than it is on the iPhone 13, by the way. iPhone 13 gets me around 6 hours of screen on time. I hate this stupid little feature. The iPhone 13 gets me around 6 hours of screen on time. 13 Pro Max, once again, 8 to 10. So battery life, once again, literally no issues. You will have no complaints. But now let's talk about this camera. This camera does not disappoint. If you're going from the iPhone 13 Pro Max to the 16 Pro Max for camera alone, you will notice it is a tiny bit better, but it's not like worth the money that you're paying for the 16 Pro Max, if that makes sense. The 13 Pro Max has an amazing camera. Like, this phone only came out 2021. This phone is only 3 years old. Apple, we're at the point now where they can't really improve that much every year. I heard Apple is low-key gonna stop making a new phone every year. That's what the leaks are suggesting, because you can't really, at least now, have big improvements like you used to be able to every single year back in like 2015, 2018, whatever. Because the 13 Pro Max, it holds up amazingly. Apple could still be selling this phone and it would be perfectly fine. Now, obviously, I would hope they wouldn't do that because it's 3 years old. I don't think Apple needs to be making a new phone every year, to be honest. But if they were to be selling this 13 Pro Max for like even now and it was still their newest phone, I mean, people would still buy it. This phone is still great and it can still get away with it because this phone is literally amazing. Let's not forget, it has the MagSafe and 5G. We don't even have to like brush in on those. The only issue is that it doesn't have the USB-C, obviously. Wow, I just went on a rambling there, but this 13 Pro Max, it's literally amazing. Like, once again, Apple could sell this. Right, Apple could sell this. They're not going to sell it, obviously, because if they did, no one would buy the 16 or 14 or whatever they want to sell. So that's why Apple doesn't sell them. If you are wondering why Apple doesn't sell this phone anymore, it's because if Apple sold this phone, nobody would buy the 15 because they see that this one has better battery life than the iPhone 15, has 120 hertz, and the iPhone 15 does not. Now the iPhone 15, it does have the better processor and USB-C and all that stuff. So I guess they even out with each other. But let's talk about the camera because I'm going on a rambling here. I will say, spec-wise, the camera has gotten significantly improved on the newer models of iPhones, like the 16s, 15 Pros, whatever. They're around 48 to 50 megapixel cameras, while the iPhone 13s are 12 megapixel cameras. It's not like they're not detailed. They're still like plenty fine. It won't bother you. I'm not gonna lie. The camera on this phone I don't know what to say besides it's really good. Like, let's see what the 4K options are while we're at it. The camera on this phone doesn't disappoint. It is 12 megapixels, which doesn't seem that good, but it's not bad. It's really not bad. It can film up to 4K 60. I'm pretty sure the 16 can film up to 4K 120 frames per second, which is insane. This phone, at the end of the day, it's good enough, and it's nowhere near a bad phone yet. Now, this phone is, I will not lie, significantly better than the 12 Pro Max. It has a smaller notch, longer battery life, the newer processor, which is a pretty big jump from the 12, and it also has 120 hertz, once again, the better battery life, because the phone is thicker. The speakers on this phone, I guess, let me touch on that. It's good. It also has that little LED light indicator, whatever it is, to help you with night vision. So I'm not gonna lie, if you can get this phone for under $650, then you won't be disappointed. Now, if you're thinking of getting the 16 or this phone, then get the 16 because of the newer processor and the dynamic island and the USB-C. But if you get the 13 Pro Max, what I'm trying to say is that you won't be disappointed. But before we sign out here, let me compare it to other iPhones, just in case you have one of these iPhones I end up bringing and you want to know like the size difference. The iPhone 11 compared to the 13 Pro Max, if you are doing this upgrade, massive, massive, massive upgrade. Massive. XR to the 13 Pro Max, I mean, this is a night and day, even today. You can buy the 13 Pro Max from the iPhone XR and you'll be, I don't know what to say besides it's an amazing upgrade. Here we have the iPhone SE with the flat design, that Apple obviously brought back from the old days with the iPhone 12 and obviously the 13 and the newer phones. Here's the iPhone 4S. I doubt nobody's using this phone anymore, but just for size comparison, Jesus Christ, 6.7 inch screen, like 3.5 inch screen. Literally, look how big those bezels were. We always forget about how big the bezels used to be. Samsung S21, which is like a 6-inch screen around that. 13 Pro Max is obviously going to be bigger. 13 Pro Max is huge. So if you are using one of these small phones, you will notice the size is like ginormous. I mean, obviously, you will notice, and it's also heavy. It is also heavy. I forgot to mention that. It is heavier than my Samsung Note 20 Ultra without a case on. Like, my Samsung Note 20 Ultra has a case on, and it's still lighter than this phone. And the Samsung Note 20 Ultra has a built-in pin. So, iPhone 13 Pro Max, it's a really good built phone. It's heavy, feels nice in the hands, does not lag, super smooth. Obviously, has 120 hertz. Gonna have like 5 years left of OS support in it. Probably 5 to 4. This phone could definitely take 5 to 4 more years. This is a great phone for a grandma, for you. I mean, for a grandma, this is overkill. I'm not gonna lie. But 13 Pro Max is a literal 10 out of 10 phone. The only issue is that it doesn't have USB-C and the dynamic island, but the dynamic island is not a need. But anywho, let me know what we thought of this video. If